The baby's cries echoed through the marble halls of the Hawthorne mansion like a siren that refused to rest. Nannies had come and gone since dawn. One rocked, one sang, another checked the temperature of the room twice, then 3 times. A pediatrician had already been called and dismissed. The infant, wrapped in silk blankets that cost more than most people's monthly salaries, screamed as if the world itself had betrayed him. And in a way, it had. Sebastian Hawthorne stood at the foot of the enormous bed, his jaw clenched, his expensive watch ticking louder than his patience. At 38, he was one of the youngest self-made millionaires in the city, tech genius, media darling, ruthless negotiator. But none of that mattered now. Because he could not stop his own son from crying. Take him out, Sebastian snapped. Do something. Anything. The nanny froze. Sir, we've tried everything. He won't feed. He won't sleep. He just what? Sebastian barked. Just cries. That's your answer. The woman swallowed and carefully lifted the baby from the bed. The moment she moved him, his cries grew sharper, more desperate, his tiny fists clenching the air. Sebastian turned away, running a hand through his hair. The room still smelled faintly of lavender and grief. It had been 6 weeks since his wife, Eleanor, had died during childbirth. 6 weeks since joy and tragedy had arrived in the same breath. Since then, the mansion had felt hollow. The nanny hurried out, nearly colliding with someone in the hallway. I'm sorry, a soft voice said. The nanny barely glanced at her. Watch where you're going, she muttered, continuing down the corridor with the screaming child. The woman who had apologized stepped back against the wall, lowering her eyes. Her name was Ruth Carter. She was the newest maid. Poor, black, invisible to most of the people who lived and worked in the mansion. Ruth had been hired 2 weeks earlier through an agency that didn't ask many questions. She wore simple clothes, her shoes worn but clean, her hair pulled back neatly. She moved quietly, efficiently, like someone used to taking up as little space as possible. But as the baby's cries echoed down the hall, Ruth's hands froze around the cleaning cloth she was holding. Her chest tightened. She knew that cry. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't pain. It was something else. Something deeper. Ruth turned slowly toward the nursery wing, even though she knew she wasn't supposed to be there. Staff had been warned, stay out unless called. But the sound pulled at her like gravity. Inside the master bedroom, Sebastian sat heavily on the edge of the bed. The silence after the baby was removed felt worse than the crying. He stared at the empty spot where his son had been lying, memories crashing over him, Eleanor laughing, Eleanor whispering to her belly at night, Eleanor promising she'd teach their child how to be brave. His fists tightened. I can buy anything, he muttered to himself. Doctors, experts, the best nannies in the world. Yet none of it mattered. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Sebastian looked up sharply. What now? The door creaked open just a little. Ruth stood there, eyes lowered. I'm sorry to disturb you, sir, she said quietly. I was told to clean the hallway, but I heard the baby. Sebastian's irritation flared. This is not your concern. Go back to work. Ruth hesitated. I know I'm not supposed to say anything, she said, her voice trembling but steady. But, may I ask how old he is? Sebastian frowned. Why? 6 weeks, she guessed softly. His eyes narrowed. Yes. How did you? Ruth swallowed. Because that cry, it's the same. The same as what? Sebastian snapped. She finally looked up, and for a brief moment, Sebastian saw something he hadn't seen in weeks in anyone's eyes. Understanding. I had a baby once, Ruth said. A long time ago. Something in her tone made Sebastian pause despite himself. And, he asked curtly. And he cried like that, she continued. When he couldn't feel his mother anymore. Sebastian's breath caught. That's ridiculous, he said. Babies don't understand loss. Ruth shook her head slowly. They understand absence. The room fell silent. Sebastian studied her now, not as a maid, not as staff, but as a woman standing barefoot on polished marble, holding a truth he didn't want to hear. You're overstepping, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I know, Ruth replied. I'm sorry. I'll leave. She turned to go. Wait, Sebastian said suddenly. She stopped. What exactly are you suggesting? He asked. Ruth hesitated, then spoke carefully. I'm suggesting that he doesn't need more noise. Or movement. Or strangers passing him around. Sebastian scoffed. Then what does he need? She took a breath. He needs to feel safe, she said. He needs something familiar. Something real. Sebastian laughed bitterly. And what could you possibly offer that my staff can't? Ruth's hands clenched at her sides. Nothing money can buy, she said quietly. Silence stretched between them. From somewhere down the hallway, the baby's cries rose again, raw, exhausted, heartbreaking. Sebastian closed his eyes. Against every instinct he had built in boardrooms and battlefields of business, he said the words that shocked even himself. What would you do? Ruth looked up, startled. Sir, if I let you try, he said slowly. What would you do? She hesitated, fear and disbelief crossing her face. I could lose my job. Sebastian exhaled. Everyone else has already failed. Ruth nodded once. I would ask to hold him, she said. Sebastian stiffened. That's not. I wouldn't hurt him, she said quickly. I swear. Her voice cracked. Sebastian studied her for a long moment. Every warning bell in his head screamed no. Trust no one, especially not someone with nothing to lose. But then the baby screamed again. 5 minutes, Sebastian said. If this is a mistake. I understand, Ruth said. Moments later, the nanny returned, frazzled and pale, holding the still crying infant. Sebastian gestured sharply. Give him to her. The nanny stared. Sir. To her, he repeated. Ruth's arms trembled as the baby was placed against her chest. The crying didn't stop immediately. Ruth didn't panic. She didn't rock. She didn't sing. She did something no one expected. She sat down on the edge of the bed, held the baby close, and began to hum, low, steady, almost like a heartbeat. Then she whispered words no one else could hear. Words she had once spoken to her own child. And slowly, shockingly, the crying began to fade. Sebastian froze. The room held its breath. The baby's fists unclenched. His cries softened, then stopped. For the first time in weeks, the mansion was silent. And Sebastian Hawthorne realized that the poorest woman in his house had just done what his money never could. The baby slept. Not the shallow, restless dozing the doctors had promised would come, eventually, but a deep, peaceful sleep, the kind that softened his tiny features and slowed his breathing into a steady rhythm. Sebastian Hawthorne stood frozen near the bed, afraid that even a breath too loud might break the spell. Ruth remained seated, the child cradled against her chest, still humming softly. She hadn't moved since the crying stopped, as if she knew instinctively that this moment was fragile. The nanny stared, mouth slightly open. I don't understand, she whispered. He hasn't done that for anyone. Sebastian lifted a hand. Leave us. The nanny hesitated. Sir, are you sure? Leave, he said, quietly. This time, but with an authority that ended the conversation. The door closed behind her. For a long moment, neither Sebastian nor Ruth spoke. Then Sebastian said, his voice low, you said 5 minutes. Ruth nodded. I know. And yet he's still asleep. She looked down at the baby, her expression tender but guarded. Because he finally feels held, not managed. Sebastian swallowed. Who taught you that? He asked. Ruth hesitated. Life. Sebastian stepped closer, studying his son's peaceful face. He had memorized every feature already, the curve of the nose, the faint dimple in one cheek, but seeing him like this felt new. Like meeting him for the first time. What were you whispering to him? Sebastian asked. Ruth stiffened slightly. Just words. What words? She met his eyes. The kind a mother says when the world feels too big. Something in her tone struck him. My wife used to hum, Sebastian said suddenly. When she was anxious. Same rhythm. Slow. Almost like a heartbeat. Ruth's breath caught. That's because babies hear their mother's heartbeat before they hear her voice, she said softly. It's the first home they ever know. Sebastian's chest tightened. Are you saying he remembers her? I'm saying, Ruth replied carefully, that he remembers how she made him feel. Silence filled the room again, heavier now. Sebastian straightened. You mentioned you had a child. Ruth's arms tightened protectively around the baby, though he slept on. Yes, she said. Where is he? The question landed harder than Sebastian intended. Ruth looked away. Gone. Sebastian frowned. Gone how? She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there was pain there, old, deep, and carefully hidden. He died, she said simply. Sebastian felt something crack inside him. I'm sorry. So am I, Ruth replied. They stood like that, two strangers bound by loss, separated by money, status, and skin, yet standing on the same emotional ground. You didn't answer my earlier question, Sebastian said gently now. What was unthinkable about what you did? Ruth looked at him, truly looked at him, as if deciding whether to trust him with something sacred. I didn't just hold him, she said. I let him feel what he's missing. Sebastian's brow furrowed. Explain. Ruth took a breath. I let him hear my heartbeat. Skin to skin. The way mothers do when there's nothing else left. Sebastian stiffened. You broke protocol. Yes, she said. Because grief doesn't follow rules. Before he could respond, the baby stirred slightly, letting out a small sound, not a cry, but a sigh. Ruth immediately resumed humming, softer now. Sebastian watched, conflicted. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. In this room, holding my son. I know, Ruth replied. I can leave. She began to rise. Don't, Sebastian said. She froze. He ran a hand over his face. Just, don't yet. Ruth sat back down. Minutes passed. Finally, Sebastian spoke again. What was your son's name? Ruth swallowed. Isaiah. Sebastian nodded. How old was he? 3 months, she whispered. When I lost him. Sebastian felt dizzy. How? Ruth's voice hardened, not with anger, but with truth. Because I was poor. Because the hospital sent us home too early. Because no one listened when I said something was wrong. Sebastian looked away, shame creeping up his spine. He owned stock in that hospital. You understand now, Ruth continued. Why I knew that cry. Sebastian turned back to her sharply. Why are you here, Ruth? She blinked. Because I need work. No, he said. I mean here. In this house. Ruth hesitated. I don't believe in coincidence. Sebastian let out a slow breath. Neither do I. The baby shifted again, then settled. Sebastian made a decision. You're staying, he said. Ruth looked up. Sir, I want you here, he said carefully. Not as a maid. Her heart raced. Then as what? He hesitated. The word felt dangerous. As someone my son trusts, he said. As someone who understands him. Ruth's eyes widened. People will talk. They already do, Sebastian replied. Let them. She shook her head. You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking, he said. And I know this, my son hasn't slept like this since his mother died. Ruth looked down at the baby again, torn. I can't replace her. I'm not asking you to, Sebastian said. I'm asking you to help him survive the absence. Tears welled in Ruth's eyes. You're playing with something sacred. So are you, he said gently. And you're doing it better than anyone else. Another silence. Then Ruth nodded. I'll stay, she said. But on one condition. Sebastian raised an eyebrow. Name it. You treat me like a human being, she said. Not charity. Not staff. Not a secret. Sebastian met her gaze. Agreed. From that day on, things changed. The baby slept. The mansion breathed again. And slowly, without either of them realizing it, Ruth and Sebastian began to heal each other. But secrets have a way of rising to the surface. And soon, Sebastian would learn a truth about Ruth that would shake his understanding of the past, and his son's future.